Why this topic? Why do we have a topic on women's movements and other social movements? So we have actually a good range of speakers to talk about this particular topic, and I just want to give a few general points about why we're talking about this. First, a short introduction about our research program consortium, Women's Empowerment in Muslim Context, WEMC. We are a consortium of 8 partners, launched on 1st July 2006, led by the Southeast Asia Research Center of City University of Hong Kong, Shirkatgah Women's Resource Center, Pakistan, Center for Environment, Gender and Development, Hong Kong, Development of Community Health Sciences, Aga Khan University, International Gender Studies Center, Oxford University, Semarak, Cerlang Nusa, Indonesia, Solidaritas Perempuan Indonesia, and Women Living Under Muslim Laws. We have brochures around, and you can find out more about our RPC from the brochure. Now, our understanding of women's empowerment is that it is an increased ability to question, challenge, and eventually transform unfavorable gendered power relations, which are often legitimized in the name of culture. Now, 2 questions arise from this. How do women question, challenge, and transform unfavorable power relations? This is a how question. And the second question is, how are the unfavorable gendered power relations transformed from what to what? Okay, so here are 2 views from our research framework of how we see this problem. This is a diagram from our research framework of how women view their situations of power, empowerment, and disempowerment. So very often opportunities may be presented by policies, programs, projects. But then, how do the women themselves view these opportunities? And how do they view themselves in relation to those opportunities? Do they see themselves as having a future which can utilize those opportunities? And if they decide to grasp those opportunities, what are their sources of support and obstruction? Okay, so I'm not going to go into all the details of this diagram, which you will find more about in our book, which is, this is a little commercial break here, which you can pick up copies of. We are distributing some limited copies here. And another important part of how we see women empowering themselves is that they not only do this envisioning of their own capabilities and their potential as individuals, but they also do it collectively. And they organize, and they may even institutionalize some of what they envision in the institutions of state and society. Now, this is a kind of a complicated diagram. Mainly what we want to show is that it's not unilinear, and it's not always going from individual, collective, organized, and institutionalized, and the individuals are always involved at every stage, and that what is upscaled can also be downscaled. Okay, so again, read all about it in our book, which is called Women Empowering Themselves, a framework that interrogates and transforms, and that's our research framework in a published form. Now, this forum is for our RPC an opportunity to develop our research framework further. Why? Because when women move to empower themselves, they don't just move in a vacuum. They're not living in a world only of women, right? So as they move to empower themselves, what happens? Who opposes them? Okay, so just now you saw that very complicated diagram, right? Okay, let me just go back. The sources of obstruction. So who are these sources of obstruction? Okay, so here in this forum, we want to go a bit forward. Who opposes them? So there are forces that are against women's rights. Okay, but it's not so simple, because there are some forces that are against women's rights as individuals, but they're for their rights as wives and mothers. And why? Why are they making this differentiation between individuals and wives and mothers? Is there some kind of compulsory feminism going on? Okay, and then they also see there are those who support them, the sources of support. So there are forces that support women's rights. But why? Why are they supporting women's rights? And to what extent? And with what agendas? So are they using women's issues for other purposes? Okay, I'm raising these questions for our speakers to answer. I'm not answering them. And then we have those who are standing aside and doing nothing. And this is also important for us to take note of. There are forces that regard women's rights as irrelevant or trivial. Okay, so they neither support nor obstruct, they just stand by. Why? Because maybe they see other issues as more important. Okay, so maybe we want to consider, are these questions useful for us to consider when we are trying to analyze how women ally themselves or not with other social movements? Okay, so when women are negotiating and overcoming oppositions, we often find that they engage in the politics of opposition. And what does that mean? That means that alliances are formed based on common enemies. Okay? And you find that when politics of opposition occur, then, the alliance building is more broad-based. But are these only short-term? Only until the enemy has been overcome? Okay? Actually, when we come to the politics of transformation, then we find that alliance building gets much more difficult because it's not based on who your enemy is, but what you want and what your vision of the future is. Now, the key question that, again, I hope our speakers will be answering is how women's rights can be prioritized across all issues so that there is the environment, and there is women's rights somewhere, there is anti-globalization, and there are women's rights somewhere. It's seen as separate. So how do you prioritize women's rights as a cross-cutting issue across all issues? Okay, so why are women's rights not prioritized in those instances where we find them not being prioritized? And here I think it's important for us to make a differentiation between the politics of redistribution, that is shares of the pie. Are women just asking for a larger share of the pie? 30%, 40%, 50%, what? Or are you talking about the politics of restructuring, remaking a different pie? Okay? Now, very often, there are social movements that see themselves as involved in the politics of restructuring, a different kind of economy based on alternative sources of energy, okay? A different economic system, that is not class-based capitalism. So they see themselves as, in one way or another, remaking a different pie. And very often, they then see women's rights advocates as being only in the politics of redistribution without realizing that when actually one asks for a gender-equitable society, it is actually a different kind of society. Okay? And I think that is the exercise we need to do a lot more of, and that we should prioritize. That is, we need to really locate ourselves in the politics of restructuring so that women's rights are at the center of all movements aimed at restructuring state and society, regardless of what kind of restructuring process is under discussion. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Over to Andrea.